Welcome to our podcast series on all things coaching in higher education. I'm your host, Tim Jansa, a certified leadership and organizational development coach and higher ed professional of almost 20 years. My guest today is a dear friend and my coaching partner in crime, Sarah E. Spencer. Sarah is the founder of On Point Global Strategies and Coaching and an experienced coach who supports professionals with executive, leadership, and career coaching. With over 3 decades of experience, she focuses especially on one particular aspect of higher ed that is very dear to me, international or global education. Unfortunately, it's also an area that has been massively affected by the truly seismic changes in national policy in the second Trump administration. So let's dive right into the exciting world of international higher education and find out how coaches can help international offices and their professionals navigate these treacherous waters. Welcome to the show, Sarah. It's so good to have you on.
Thank you so much, Tim, for the invitation today. I'm really thrilled about your new podcast, especially because, as we've talked about, professional coaching has been really integrated into industry, say the past decade, for professional development and all sorts of support. And I'm excited to see higher education adapting what I'm going to call the successful modality in support of individuals, teams, and of course, our global workplaces.
That's a great intro, actually. I love the way you said it. And you're right. It is an extremely effective and important way and modality, as you call it, to really support leadership development. So we all saw that recent report by NAFSA, which is the Association of International Educators. They projected that there may be as much of a 30 to 40% decline in new international student enrollment in the United States in the fall of 2025. And they're saying that this could lead to as much as a 15% drop in overall enrollment, as well as a $7 billion loss in revenue and as much as 60,000 fewer jobs. I mean, this certainly doesn't paint a terribly rosy picture of what's happening in international higher ed on our campuses. So what are you hearing about the impact that this is already having on institutions and how leaders are dealing with this tremendous uncertainty?
Yeah, well, I think that uncertainty is certainly the word of 2025, right? It'll be interesting to see what, Webster's or whatever comes up with that. So, when I'm asked how the global education sector is responding, the first thing people really say is this is not our first roadshow or trip around the sun or whatever the appropriate analogy is. And I think we always need to remember that 9/11 and the impact on visas and CVIS processes for our international students, to H1N1 and Arab Spring, and of course the big one, 2020 and the pandemic, and the impact on both student mobility and all the virtual learning, right, how we learned. I think we really found that our global education leaders are highly flexible, similar, frankly, to our cross-cultural adaptability. That said, I think many leaders feel that this is different, more expansive, from the U.S. border and immigration, even for visitors, to international student visas, as you mentioned earlier, and to the impact on federal funding. So I think on the positive side, U.S. students studying abroad is actually still really strong, and there's great interest in that. So there's a little bit of good news in all of that uncertainty. So overall, I think we're recording this in August 2025, so we'll date stamp that. I see international educators as centered and committed to intercultural learning, kind of more than ever. We need this more than ever. And I think they're more tired. And I think I really see them being more intentional about their own and their team's physical and emotional health, and really trying to find innovative ways to invest in that support and their professional development as resources and staffing are frankly just being reduced. So positive, and then really just acknowledging, I think, the toll.
I'm so glad you brought this up, Sarah, that this isn't really their first rodeo. I mean, yes. You're right. I mean, I hadn't even thought about 9/11.
That's another good analogy.
Because those are very, very different times. Think about, especially the pandemic. I mean, we all know international higher educators who were freaking out that infamous March 13th, 2020, when all of a sudden things just shut down. And I heard these horror stories of people working day and night, just to get their students home. So, I mean, that was a true crisis moment. And it's not like this was completely unexpected and unanticipated, let's say it this way. So I think there's definitely something there where there's tremendous resilience that has developed, I think, over the years in those international offices and the officers and the people who work in this field. But what you mentioned also is very true. I mean, there's a lot of high stakes decisions in a very complex environment because, especially for our listeners who may not be that familiar with it, we're, of course, talking about US students going abroad, but of course, there's a lot of international students coming in, which is also a great source of revenue and all these kind of things. But there's all the stuff that is happening on campus. There's curriculum support, there's events. The international offices are so central to a lot of what's happening on campuses and any of their international initiatives. So how would you say then that coaching for these international global offices is different than maybe some other offices on campus? And then specifically, how can coaching help the leaders, the professionals in that field to operate in this very unique environment?
Great question. Let's start with the similarities. Coaching is this confidential space to work through challenges and opportunities and to kind of support how one wants to take action or not take action, right? Kind of fundamental. So I think no matter the sector and frankly, no matter the unit within international education, coaching supports leadership performance, organizational structure, strategies for navigating stakeholders, imposter thoughts, even for people who are really experienced, someone there to support the emotional and those feeling spaces that you really feel that you can't reveal or bring into your professional space, especially as a leader. I always say that coaching is that space for that quick debrief, the meeting that you cannot stop thinking about. And I think, sometimes part of a coaching session can help reset your energy and your focus. But what makes international education unique? And Tim, I'm going to invite you to actually add to this list as well.
Okay, I'll try to my
I
best.
would say first off, we have what I'm going to call expansive stakeholder engagement. So on campus, for those at at universities, faculty, deans, administrative, executive leadership, students, parents, we truly are a mini university. And that's, I think many of us say that all the time. So it's not just the physical home campus, but literally the world that we deal with. So we balance language and culture, currency, international partners, as well as all of those political and economic systems. And it's a lot. And I will say, as decades-long global educators, I do think we kind of thrive on it, right? We are energized by that complexity. We even have our own language of acronyms. So it's really helpful working with people who actually understand how to balance that home campus or that home office of your organization with all that global activity and actually what people are saying. But I think we also point out that much or most of this is out of our control. We don't have a lot of control in that spaces. So I think coaching at its foundation can really help international educators in all of that expansive global space try to really figure out, what do I want to do with this? How do I feel about this? And how I want to move forward. And I know that sounds really simple, but powerful questions in coaching are some of the most effective spaces that we have. I think also coaching can help a client or even a team break down and identify, I call them like aspects of intercultural situations where that context may not be immediately evident, and that can really help support decision making. Right? There's just peeling back those layers that we just may not see, even though many of us feel that we are, experts at intercultural or cross-cultural learning and communication. As I think about, bringing in particularly coaching and a mindset or a pedagogy into international education, when I work with both teams and leaders, I always include skill building about what is a coaching mindset. And some of those simple techniques that we as coaches use, for example, asking questions that start with what or how instead of why. Mm-hmm. Just even that simple thing can really help, I think, anybody working with students, parents, all those international partners to have really more effective conversations and to feel, I think everybody feels a little bit better at the end of the day.
I can see how international higher ed, and I've actually witnessed this, of course, is really a breeding ground for assumptions. And for stereotypes. And I think even seasoned professionals, when they deal with a vast array of international backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, whether it's colleagues on campus, whether it's students who are here visiting and studying from far-flung parts of the world, we're biased creatures. And I think it's so much easier to kind of let these biases well up when we're dealing with people who are obviously not from just around the corner. So I think having coaching as the space where we could also interrogate and explore those assumptions and kind of really work on our mindset. We talked a little bit about the tensions of the different goals and pressures that international offices face. On one hand, a lot of them, they generate potentially a lot of revenue because a lot of students who come in from abroad, they pay full price basically for their education,
Mhm.
which is, I think, also one of the reasons why international education is something that the administration often likes to stress. Look, we're this international, wonderful international college. There are all these opportunities, but of course, there are revenue generating rationales behind a lot of that. Now, with this drop in international enrollment, that of course is going to probably affect the budgets of these offices. So there's that. But then you mentioned earlier that a lot of folks who work in international offices, they're committed. They love this field. They love this whole idea of bridging cultural gaps, and they find meaning in this type of work. So
Mhm.
what do you hear? What's your experience with people trying to kind of navigate this tension between what they must do from an institutional perspective and what they feel like they must do from an intrinsic motivation side?
I think that tension is real. And so I think one of the places from a coaching pedagogy, I would start, which is investigating questions like what elements create tension for you and your role or for your office or for your team. Really actually defining and identifying what those tensions are. Because I think when we hear about, revenue driven goals and people making decisions, again, out of the control, there may be panic, there may be grief, seeing budgets cut. I mean, there's again a lot of emotions, and I think in coaching, one of those things we get to do is focus on emotions and feelings a little bit more, a bit of the heart and the head, and not just the head. So I would also ask questions about how does your unit or how do you contribute or ignore said revenue goals, and do you actually understand the revenue goals, right? Sometimes they are shifting very quickly from an executive leadership standpoint, and we in global ed are trying to catch up with that, as well as looking at visa numbers, study abroad, retention numbers, and everything else. I always ask people to remember or to provide examples of when they have been successful regarding some of those tensions. I think we remember the negative, the failures, the couple mistakes that we wish we could redo. And again, I think so many of us have those successes. And so it's really an opportunity to remember what those are. I also, we were talking a little bit before about core values. Core values are always kind of part of coaching space. But I think, I did my top 50 core values, 20 years ago or so. Many of us did that exercise. And I think it was an opportunity to identify what are those core values.
And
Personally,
have they shifted?
no, they still are, friendship, communication, all of those sorts of things. But I think it's important as people, advance, particularly in leadership, and then actually are managing people who are newer to the workplace, to be able to understand and to articulate why we have revenue goals and why those decisions are being made the way they are. So I think, kind of again, that values alignment and what works and what doesn't, I think is also really key. Also in that tension space, I would ask about creative or entrepreneurial ideas that may not have been actioned, but actually can support shifting revenue priorities. I feel that we as global educators have a cajillion ideas, very creative. And again, we have the world to play in and to work in. So I think that coaching, as I've seen it, provides not only clarity, but really builds confidence about decision making, that allyship building, strategy, even risk taking. Where's your risk? What's the risk assessment and how do you want to go forward? And I think we in higher ed are mission driven, period, right? I think it's one of our core things of why we work in higher ed, whether it's teaching or whatever role we have. And while our objectives may be focused on intercultural exchange, we need to also speak and advocate more clearly and actually be more persuasive about how we actually contribute to that bottom line, if that's what's important regarding revenue goals. So those are some of the questions, some of the spaces I would ask if I was working with an individual leader or a team in that tension.
Thank you for listing those. That's really, really powerful information. It's super interesting. And it was a reminder for me as well, because I haven't been very active in this space, in a little while. What I'm hearing is, first of all, coaching, opening up a space for emotions, for feelings, for people to process those. The idea of labeling, I think that is an extremely powerful tool as well, because labeling allows people to really dig deep and to put it out there and to articulate what it is they're feeling, what they might be afraid of, what might be working, what may not be working. And also, what I'm hearing you say is this idea of the negativity bias. And that's certainly true, because what we do in coaching is we take a negative experience, but turn it into something forward looking and positive by asking, what have you learned from this experience?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not everything was negative, but I think the way we are wired, you're absolutely right. We focus so much more easily on the negative than we do on the positive. So using the coaching space to allow people to focus on the mission, to allow people to focus on and remind them, or allow them to remind themselves of why they're doing this kind of work. I think that is so important, because it's so easy to get beaten down by business rationales and revenue goals and all these kind of things.
And a lot of change.
And oh my gosh, and a lot of change, and daily. Even just think about a simple case of a student abroad who gets sick, or who might have an accident or something like that. I mean, that is a crisis, and it needs to be addressed right away. So you never really know what you're going to be walking into when you go to the office in the morning, or even before you leave at night. So I'd love to shift things just a little bit and talk about the role of the Global Ed office on campus. And we've touched on this a little bit. We both read this article recently by one of our colleagues who reminded us that a global ed office is not just about incoming, outgoing students and all these kind of things that are front and center, but also that potentially it could really have a central node function on campus to bring together all kinds of different offices and people and serve as a hub for cross-unit collaboration, especially, where higher ed is so siloed. How can we do that as coaches in terms of supporting these kind of initiatives and bring some awareness to this?
I will always say, silos exist in all workplaces. But Tim, I think as you pointed out in your recent podcast with Southern Florida and the ICF organization, higher ed is unique, I think, for the number of silos we have and their height, right? There are a lot of them. And I always feel like coaching in that space can help us maybe feel a little bit better about our roles and facilitating those global experiences. And I don't think we're going to be silo busters, but I think we can maybe reduce the height as we strengthen our partnerships either across campus, or again, we have so many international education organizations are also working with institutions. So I was like, we're not going to bust them, but maybe we can just shorten them a little bit. I think for coaching in that partnership building, and what does it mean among all the silos? Obviously, again, we talked about that safe space, but I think coaching can help us hone actually our listening skills to those different silos. And I know we would all think that we're excellent listeners, but there's a lot that's being said and we may be perceiving it in different ways. And I think coaching also provides space to actually reflect not only what was said, but particularly one's reactions to that. As I talked about, what may be in your head, but what's in your gut. And, again, that space that most of us don't want to acknowledge. So thinking about, as we read that article just published recently in the Gateway International blog, I actually love role playing with clients. It means to sit in the other chair. I'm like, you're the new dean. What are your top priorities? You're the leader of advancement or alumni, and you keep getting these emails from the new senior international officer or the director of study abroad who really wants to meet with you. But wow, what's on your to-do list for the day? I think if you work in an international education organization, what does actually your global education professional on campus or that faculty member that you really are trying to get in touch with, what does their day look like? And how do you fit in or not fit in with that? And I always say, if you were them, how would you be responding to whatever's being said, whatever's being, proposed, all of those sorts of things. And I think that coaching not only increases empathy for that other person, that other office, that other silo, but it really can, again, help you hone your talking points and clarify how we all can support students, and also not to take it personally. I have worked with so many people who were like, oh, I realized, I was taking this personally and it wasn't. I'm just not, as we talk about, I'm like, if you're a president of a university, you got a deck of cards and you got 52 cards. Are you going to play one of those 52 on global education? Maybe, maybe not. It depends. But you got a lot of other cards that you have to be then dealing with. So I think, again, that not taking it personally and how do we align other silos' goals with what international programs can do and how do we actually support in that? Again, we're not going to bust it, but I do think we have an opportunity maybe to actually really feel confident about our facilitator role. We're just not in one silo, but we really are facilitating among them. And how can we identify what that silo's goals is and how we can support that? So that's me looking at it positively. How about that?
I think that's great. And you know what? I was just struck while you were talking by how this conversation is different from the other conversations I've had as part of the series, because you're going at it or looking at it very much from an intercultural, cross-cultural communication aspect. And that is so clear. And I think this is maybe a skill that fits the global, international global ed space extremely well because of the nature of just how it's made up, of what the purpose is of what we're trying to do. So when we're talking about awareness, of questioning our assumptions, of helping people explore and understand and listen, I think these are some amazing skills I think that any leader should definitely have, but they're particularly important when we're talking about, international global ed and when we're working with students and especially, for example, getting them ready for a study abroad trip or even for a semester abroad or so. Those are some things that are always front and center to help them get ready for that experience. So when you look ahead a little bit, I mean, it's, of course, crystal balls are all shattered, I guess, this day and age. They don't really work. But what leadership competencies in the international global ed space do you feel are probably most critical for the next generation of educators? And how can we as coaches help leaders develop them and hone these skills so they're as future ready, quote unquote, as they can possibly be?
Well, I would say that it's not even about next generation or emerging leaders or those sorts of things, but really about our current leaders and our professional colleagues. I teach a workshop on power skills, which is basically soft skills rebranded. I just want to say this is not my original idea at all, but I'm going to credit our now retired colleague, Natalie Mello, formerly of the Forum on Education Abroad. We were on a session, a conference on global power. And she referenced first, we need to rebrand soft skills as power skills. And she had just heard it at an HBCU conference the year before. So 2018, something like that. But in my workshops, I talk about what skills are most important in the age of AI. So that's why I think some of these skills are just for all of us now, because so much is changing with AI. And of course, what skills? What does the research say? They're the power skills: communication, curiosity, adaptability, tolerance of ambiguity, humility, resilience. All those sorts of things that I think we all can really relate to. And it's interesting. I once asked my very talented coaching teacher, as I was doing my professional training, as we all do, she coached tech execs in the Bay Area. And I said, what's the difference between executive coaching? Everybody uses the word executive coaching. I'm like, what is that really? And just professional coaching. And she said, she named that the competencies that get you to the C-suite, I'm going to, with air quotes, if you will, don't keep you there. Leaders are promoted based on operational success, but it's your power skills that are the most critical. So when I think about it, coaching holds space for one to be vulnerable, to show your frustration and your judgment, as you were talking about bias, and to explore how you want to develop these skills. We cannot develop all of them at the same time. I once had a client who didn't think they had any skills to strengthen. They were strong on all the power skills, which was another interesting conversation. But also what resources are there to support and kind of what's important to you and then what's important to other people. So I think coaching, again, provides that space and that facilitation, whether, again, it's an individual or for a team. And I always laugh that the number one skill everybody wants to strengthen is time management. They're like, if I just was better at time management.
Interesting.
But interestingly enough, I think kind of as we were talking about uncertainty, tolerance to ambiguity is one of the key ones, both for the next generation of leaders and just actually really helps all of us in 2025 and beyond.
I tell you what, Sarah, I'm so glad you brought up power, because power differential is something that I have talked a lot about when I was mentoring educators, because ultimately what we're talking about is education.
Mm-hmm.
And when you educate, of course, you could just be, the sage on the stage and filling all these supposedly empty minds, which of course is nonsense. I have always very strongly bought into the notion of reducing the power differential and understanding what that is and finding that fine line of, yes, of course, if you're the expert in the room or in front of a class or when you're talking to somebody, that's fine. But you want to reduce that power differential so it opens up people's minds, reduces anxieties, and allows you to ask genuine questions that are also perceived as being genuine. So it's all about pedagogy. It's all about helping people find education in unexpected places. And I think, the being aware of power dynamics is extremely important.
Yeah.
Sarah, as we're wrapping up, what would you say to somebody who wants to enter the international global ed space as a coach? Is there a secret sauce? Are there some traps, something to be aware of? What would you advise those people to be aware of and to be cautious around?
Yeah. I don't know about your training. I always heard that a good professional coach, trained coach, can coach anybody about anything, on anything. I'm not sure if that's what you heard.
Yeah.
I actually don't necessarily agree about that. I do both career employment coaching, leadership, and executive spaces. And so I think particularly for career, a knowledge of the sector is really, really, really important. I think as we work also with clients, what are our clients' goals? I would say that ultimately, I'm just going to say, and I would say that that's why you and I bond so much as coaches. We know the global education sector and space really well. We know our colleagues, we understand some of those things, which actually then can lead us to ask much better questions. I think we can go a little bit deeper, a little bit faster. Also, I work with people who may not exactly know what they want to talk about in every single session in, a coaching session, and really helping them design, I would say, an itinerary where you get to decide where the stops are and where you want to stop, but just giving people some direction. So understanding the space, understanding the nomenclature and our language. I think higher ed in general, though, is a very rich space for coaching. And as I talked about at the beginning, I'm excited both for your podcast and see how coaching, particularly as professional development, can be really integrated. We have conferences and we have site visits and we have some trainings and we have obviously our on-campus opportunities. But I think particularly as after people get through that kind of functional expertise of understanding the job, how does coaching actually really help leaders and managers and people who do want to advance? I'm not sure if I answered your question, Tim.
I think you did. And whether or not you did, I think we're just going to leave up to our listeners. But anyway, seriously, Sarah, these are, as I like to say, words to live and coach by. Mm-hmm. So thank you so very much for taking the time, for sharing your expertise, your insights. This has been a great conversation and has kind of reminded me also of why I'm so passionate about global and international ed. And I think you're absolutely right. It's just an amazing field. Great. So thank you again. And
thank you.
Thank you to all our listeners. We really appreciate you taking the time to watch this episode. If you like what you heard, please click the like button and to subscribe to the channel. Your support really means the world to us. And if you're interested in knowing more about this episode, our guest, today's topic, and also to find Sarah's contact information as well as some other resources, please visit our companion website, which is higheredcoaching.us or leadershipimagined.com/podcast. See you next time and keep making a difference, one client and one conversation at a time. Take care.